And this is a, I don't like this slide, but I'm going to put everything up here for you and try to explain it to you. All right, so this is a support cell in the peripheral nervous system. It's associated, all the axons, and there's, I don't know, millions of them or thousands of them, but all the axons in the peripheral nervous system have Schwann cells associated with them, and in some cases a little bit more intimately than others. Some axons, the Schwann cell wraps around the axon and produces something called the myelin sheath. All right, so look at this with me. This is a perfect. This is a good. So you would agree with me. You don't have to, but you better. This is an axon. All right. Well, actually, yeah. Okay, let's call it an axon. But you can see running down the center is this kind of, I don't know, reddish, orangish looking thing in the center. In fact, that's actually the axon. All the stuff coating it is something called the myelin sheath. And the myelin sheath is produced by Schwann cells. So if you look at this, you'll see this little big bump right here, or this bump down here. That's actually supposed to represent the Schwann cell. All the multiple layers which seem to be coating, there you go, coating the axon is actually this lipoprotein molecule called the myelin sheath. So the myelin sheath is produced by the Schwann cell and wraps around. Okay. Now here's something that you guys can really understand to pin this all together. Okay. This is the axon. You know, it comes from a neuron up here. What goes down this thing is an action potential. But really what it is an electrical signal. And it's just kind of like electricity, you know, that flows through your house, right? You got to insulate it. You got to wrap something around those electric wires so they don't sort of short circuit. Circuit. Same thing in the nervous system, right? You got this big thing called the nerve, and running in it is thousands of these axons. Well, if they weren't coated with something, there'd be this massive electric shortage and nothing would ever happen. So the myelin sheath is produced by these Schwann cells, and it's basically insulation, you know, wrapping around the axons to isolate the axons from one another as they run through a nerve. So that's pretty easy to understand. My dad was an electrical maintenance guy and worked in a big plant in Cincinnati where I'm from. And you know, Dad would, you know, he always had this black electrician's tape. You know, it was like, you know, everybody, you know, every electrician I knew had this stuff, right? And they used it to wrap around bare wires. So that I found out firsthand why you need to do that when I had an electrical accident in the house. And the old man never let me forget it, right? And I thought I could do what he did. Well, I couldn't. Anyway, because I didn't know about electricity that long. Anyway, so, but see, it says here, a myelin sheath, typically a Schwann cell, can cover or myelinate about 1 millimeter of axon. All right, well, let's say that this axon is, I don't know, 100 millimeters long. I'm just making this up now, which means if one of these cells only does a little bit, then you got to have multiple ones, all kind of lined up next to one another. All right, great. And you'll notice, if you look at this, there's like a little pinch right here. So this is one Schwann cell in the myelin, and this is another Schwann cell in the myelin, and there's any more, right? Well, there's this little gap where one cell ends and the other begins, tiny little gap between the insulation, okay? And the space between the myelin sheath is called, this is the old name for it, the notophron VA, it's the same one I still use. It's also called the neurofibril node. I just wish they'd leave the names in there. So I'm going to call it the notophron VA. It's this little gap right here. Now, this is easy for me because I don't have to do this, right? Because I'm going to leave this for my physiology people. When you take physio, you know, from whoever you take it with, they're going to tell you, because you got to learn it in physio. I don't have to because this is anatomy. I just got to tell you the structure. As the electrical impulse travels down the axon, it actually gets to this little node where it's not myelinated, and the impulse, believe it or not, actually does a little jump across this gap. And as I'm going to tell you here in just a second, if you measure the speed at which an impulse travels along an axon between an axon which is insulated and one which isn't, they travel a lot faster in these. And your physio teachers are going to tell you about influx of sodium ions and how these little impulses jump at the node. But you don't need to know that for me. all you need to know is about the myelin sheath. Yes?